I want to come back to the brain here again. So I'm looking for you to go to that picture of the brain. Hannah's my trusty page finder here. Keep going, yeah, keep going. Yep, about 2 or 3 more. Keep going, no, keep going. Excellent, right there. 249 is where we are in your textbook. $249. You ready tomorrow? We're going to do some dissecting of these brains. Should be a good time. I'm looking forward to it with you. But hear me, friends. Hear me, hear me. Shh, 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 shh. I don't have tomorrow a step-by-step, cut this, and look here, and turn this. It's very much, I'm going to hand you a brain and say, here you go. Okay? I don't have enough for everybody to have their own. But there will be enough for you to have 1 per 2 people. So, got 1,000 people asking me questions. I'm sorry? You would be able to, yes. It'll be during the class time. I think it'd be better to save that time for questions and that kind of piece. Okay? Shh, stay with me, friends. So what I'm telling you is, I know you've already been studying. I know this diagram you almost have memorized at this point. That will help you for tomorrow, right? Because the point is, I want you to see the structures we've learned on an actual object. Does that make sense? Because, strange enough, the brain you get won't look like this. Huh, it's weird. It'll look like a brain. This is a picture of a brain, cut in a certain dimension. Does that make sense? So, I want you to apply. That's the key here. We're applying what you've learned. I'm going to give you a lab today that will help with that as well. A quick review of structure-wise. Cerebrum on the top, right? Which is the main, when we say brain, that's what most people think about is the cerebrum, right? The hills are called what? A gyrus. The valleys are a sulcus. And again, the gyri or sulci, that's just plural, okay? So please hear me, it's not just this one gray piece that's a gyrus. It's not just this one black line that's a sulcus, okay? All of those little hills and valleys, those are the gyri and sulci. Yes, that would be the, yes, and the picture would be the dark pieces, yes. On the brain, you'll see it's the indentations, the valleys. So upwards would be the gyruses. Inwards would be the sulcuses. The connection between the two is the corpus callosum. And again, you'll see this tomorrow. It'll be this nice, thick tract of white fibers that are connecting the two halves. We continue to move down. We're in the diencephalon. That includes the thalamus and the hypothalamus. We move down a little further. We're into the brainstem, the midbrain, the pons, the medulla oblongata. Stuck on the back here is the cerebellum. Most of your brains will have that. I'm really at the mercy of however they took them out of the sheep. Okay, so some may be missing some pieces, but you'll be able to move around and see other pieces, other folks' stuff. Many of them have the meninges still on them, right, which is the layers coating. Some of them have all 3 of the meninges. Some will just simply have that pia mater that's literally like saran wrap around the outside of the brain. All of them have that, no doubt about that. Are you with me? And that's our protection piece, right? The meninges, the pia mater, right? The dura, the arachnoid, the pia, from superficial to deep. There is a textbook picture that has like the actual brain looking. Again, this is yours will look very similar to this, just smaller. Well, not your brain personally, but the one you'll be dissecting tomorrow will be like that. Very similar. This was our functions map, and that's a few more pages over there on page 251. And we talked yesterday about the different layers, right? The different lobes that each have different functions. I see your question. Give me a second, Owen. That we've got the frontal lobe is doing your executive functions, right? Planning, memory, problem solving, these kind of things, right? Your frontal lobe also does your motor. It's divided from the parietal by that central sulcus. The parietal behind it is doing the sensory pieces, right? Our cutaneous senses, as well as understanding speech and using words, is in that green parietal area. Occipital on the back is vision, right? Understanding what you're seeing, combining images and visual recognition. That's on the occipital lobe on the back. Temporal lobe on the lateral pieces there. That's where you're hearing and where you're integrating these pieces. And then the very last piece, and guys, see your questions. Let me just finish this piece. The cerebellum on the back is your coordination center, right? Helping to smooth out the movements as you're going. Your question, Owen.
So the cerebrum is like the whole inside of the brain itself?
That's the gray part on the top.
Okay, so then how do you know the difference between a gyrus and a sulcus? Because it's all like inconsistent and like circle almost.
So the gyruses would be something that is convex. A sulcus would be a concave something. And you'll see it much better on the brain. You'll understand it more tomorrow. But that's the key, is the convex versus concave.
And then for the lobes and stuff, so like for like temporal lobe, do you want us to just be like this is for hearing, or do you want like all of the details that are
Anything that is here, I could ask you.
Okay.
Yes. And again, I may use just that, or I may summarize. Sure, either way. Yes. No, that's a very general piece. I would even, there were some folks who would argue that this map is a little deceiving, because you tend to think, oh, just this one little area does that, or they found that there's so much interconnection between these guys. Yes, right, certainly. Yeah. No, the brain is a lot more plastic, a lot more changeable than we thought. Again, when I went through school, they were telling us very little about brain plasticity. They thought basically what you've got is what you've got. No, now they've realized. I'm going to pause. Do you understand we know about this much about this organ? Okay, I'm talking like I know a whole bunch about it, or like this is a whole huge chapter about how much we know. We don't. Okay? We know very little. The interconnections between these guys are unbelievable. Okay? Like the most advanced computer we possibly have is still way less complicated than this. And I'm talking about the advanced AI type stuff. We just don't understand quite how this works. Where are your memories stored? I have no idea. We get this picture of, oh, it's like a computer, right? Where it writes it on a certain place and then retrieves it. But we have no idea how that actually works. So, again, we can still learn about it. There's still pieces. And that's why in general, these areas do X and Y and Z. Some of these little pieces, like the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area, those are pretty specific. Like we've seen people with strokes in those specific areas have the problems we talked about. So some areas we're pretty sure, yeah, no, that's much more concentrated here. Others, we truthfully don't know. Yeah, so it's a good question. Sir? It's a great question. It very much goes back to kind of what Isabella was talking about, that there would be people who have had problems in one certain areas, and you can tell that by MRIs or by surgeries, or like they actually implant. They will open up a piece of your skull and implant little electrodes there to see when you think or when you do things, how it's functioning, and that's where they make those assumptions from. Everything in science is an assumption. It's based on data, right? But we can't say 100% that here's what it is. Does that make sense? Did you all ever read that book about Phineas Gage way back in the day? Right? He was one of the big folks who got us thinking that, hey, there are certain things that different parts of the brain work for. Okay, he was in that book that you all read, which we bring the 8th graders into the lab and we dissect the same brains you all are dissecting. Yeah, well, unfortunately, we do it now. But, well, what was my point? Oh, my point was that was one of the big pieces that made us say, oh, wow, certain parts of the brain do control certain things. Does that make sense? Okay, I want to show you these. These are not in your textbook, but I thought this was worth showing you. So what we've done here, this is what we call a dermatome map. So this is taking this yellow portion, this yellow gyrus, which is where the sensory for your limbs, are y'all with me? The main sensory place is there, just posterior to that central sulcus. And what we've done is the colors, and I'll put these up on Schoology so you can see them better, but the colors show you very particularly what parts of that gyrus control what. And this picture is exaggerated to show you if the size of these organs were represented by how much of the brain controls that sensory piece. It would look like this. So are you comfortable? Your hand has a humongous part of this gyrus that gives it sensation. That's why this is such a sensitive piece of equipment, right? That I can have my eyes closed and feel this, and oh yeah, that's a phone. And oh yeah, that's a water bottle. Are you with me? And when I was in PT school, we would literally, and we'll do this when we do the senses, we had to take coins. And you had to tell what kind of coin was it. Is it a quarter? Is it a nickel? Is it a penny? Then you had to tell, was the quarter facing up or facing down? And there's different markings on them. You can feel it. On a penny, you can feel the Washington Monument, the rows, the columns of the Washington Monument, versus on the other side is Lincoln's head. They wanted you to be able to feel these things. That's because there's so much sensation here. Does that make sense? Your wrist is a very unsensitive area, right? I wouldn't, be coming up to you and be like, oh, look, oh, your skin feels so soft. No, I'm going to use my hand, right? It's much better. Are you comfortable? Your lips and your tongue, you see how much sensation that is, right? So where do you see that play out in? In babies, right? What do they do with everything? In their mouth, right? It's not because they're teething or because they just like to taste things. It's because that's their sensory. They're getting input about their world by putting it in their mouth. Does that make sense? Places like your back, the upper parts of your thighs and your calves, not much sensation there, right? I mean, you go throughout the day and rarely do you get sensation from those areas, right? But your feet, your genitals, your lips, your hands, right? These are much more sensitive. Does that make sense? And here's the same kind of map for your motor system. So that, again, more into that central sulcus is where the foot and toes and genitals are. Trunk, shoulder, arms here. Lots of area for your hand, right? Can you see? There's almost the whole entire gyrus there is just for the hand. Each of the fingers to be able to control and move and manipulate, right? Your face, how much of that is covering your eyes, nose, lips, tongue. And again, this is motor. The other one was sensory. This is motor. Does that make sense? So the pieces that require more control, more movement, more variety, you need more parts of your brain to cover that. Make sense? Good. I wanted to show you this. The ventricles was something we talked briefly about. This is there on page 253. The ventricles are what carry the cerebral spinal fluid. Remember that that's created in that arachnoid space between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater, the meninges, right? And that fluid has a couple of things that it does. It's cushioning, right? It's providing cushion for the brain, because your brain is like literally just sloshing around inside that fluid, okay? To give it some control as forces are acting on it. It also has helped moving nutrients and things through the brain and into the spinal cord. So you have these ventricles where that fluid kind of flows through. There's a good picture there that's here on page 254 that kind of shows you that circulation through the meninges, that subarachnoid space, up into the ventricles and down actually into the central canal of the spinal cord. It literally goes all the way down to your tailbone almost, all the way down to your sacrum nearly, and then back up to your brain. It kind of runs that cycle through, almost like its own little circulatory system. Again, if you're testing for meningitis, the inflammation of your meninges, they will actually have to go through, they'll go into your spine, like between two vertebrae, down into that spinal cord and pull out some of that fluid. Painful, not a fight. Has anybody had to have a spinal tap? I'm just curious in this room. That's what that's called, a spinal tap, where they're putting a needle down into that, into your spinal cord. Again, that's where all the nerves are. That hurts, right? and pulling out some of that fluid to check to see, is there inflammation, is there infection? There is some numbing that happens, but again, you're going like right literally into the nerves, so it's difficult to. Are you awake? You are. Yeah, it's good times. Sure. So yes, when you are having an epidural, it is very similar to that. It's not quite as deep. They're not actually trying to get into that central canal, but they are putting a needle down by the spinal cord there to numb the area below. Yeah, absolutely. My wife had that for both of our kids. The first one, we think they turned it up. It was just a little too high, so she had a very hard time. She couldn't really feel much down below, from about here down, because that's where they put the epidural in. So she had a hard time. She must have pushed for about 2 hours with Alex trying to get him to come out. Rebecca was like, she just plopped right out. It's pretty easy. But at least for me, I didn't have anything to do with either of them. But that's what she tells me. So pretty cool here. And again, the ventricles is not a big piece by any means. I'm not even sure it was even on your study guide, but I wanted to make sure you saw it and knew that it was there. The last piece I have for you is this guy, which is the very last page. You're just right on with your hands. I appreciate it. 267. And that's simply our connections between these different systems. In the essence of saving time, I decided not to break you up into groups and act these guys out today. I figured we could use our class time a little bit differently. I get some sad faces. I understand. It's a fun thing to do. Are you comfortable with these first three? You should already know. Right? This is the same thing as it was when we did the integumentary system, how it interacts with the nervous system. So you already learned those pieces. So there's only a few others that you are having to take care of. I was reading through them this morning, pretty straightforward. You could kind of boil them all down to the nervous system controls these things. Right? I'm super simplifying. But the endocrine system, again, those are the hormones. Well, the hypothalamus, particularly that pituitary gland, is one of the main controllers of that endocrine system. How the hormones release, when they release, all that kind of piece. No, I want you to go here. I do want you to go here. I want you to use these guys here. I don't want you just to say it controls.
Yeah. So you're saying, like, will we have to include, like, the pituitary gland?
Oh, no. Just what's here is fine. It says hypothalamus, which is just the bigger category. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Any questions there? Pretty straightforward, I hope. I will give you a little. I've had a couple of you ask me about the final exam. I am still waiting to get confirmation from WAU about what needs to happen for that. I did put up a study guide that was basically from last year. I added a couple of things to make sure we got the other pieces that we've covered. Again, that still might change, but that's a great place to start. Does that make sense? So again, I'll get that as soon as I can for you. Again, I apologize for the delay, but it's kind of out of my hands at this point. So if I don't hear something soon, we'll just say, off we go, and we'll go with it, okay? Because I don't want to come down to, like 2 days before the final, oh, here you go, here's 1,000 new things. No, I don't want to do that. Okay?
It's still going to be their test.
No, it is a combination. I've already told me that. I don't have to use their test. But am I certainly going to use parts? Absolutely. Yeah. All right, what I have for you, well, let me just stop this recording because that's all I need to do.